Hello, everyone, and welcome to my new edition of Grit Stories of Resilience. Today is July the 4th, 2025, and I want to talk for just a bit about the 4th of July and take you to two different times. One, July the 4th, 1826, and then July the 4th, 1976, and end up with a story about an individual who last year had his first July the 4th as an American citizen, having been naturalized just days before. He writes about it in an opinion column in this morning's edition of the Washington Post. And I want to read that towards the end of this relatively brief podcast. If you go back in American history, Thomas Jefferson was the third president of the United States. John Adams was the second. They had once been friends and then had an awful political falling out where they didn't like each other, speak to each other for years. Finally, over time, they began to reconcile with each other, writing letters to and from, and became friends by the time that they went into old age. Their health was failing, both of them. On July the 4th, 1826, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died. On his deathbed, John Adams spoke a few last words. The last words that the second president of the United States said on earth were, "Thomas Jefferson still lives." He did not know that Jefferson had actually died an hour or two before. And for any of you all who are history buffs, there's a third president of the United States who also died on July the 4th. That would be the fourth president, James Monroe. I'm not sure if he's the fourth president or not, but he's up there around that time. He's well known for the Monroe Doctrine, keeping foreigners out of this Western Hemisphere. He died in 1831. In 1976, this country was about less than 2 years out of Watergate and all the rancor and difficulties that had caused to the country. And yet, on July the 4th of that year, partisanship between the Republicans and the Democrats seemed to subside, at least for a day. Gerald Ford was the president of the United States. He was going to be the Republican nominee for a full 4-year term that November. Jimmy Carter, then in his 50s, not the older man that we all think of today before his passing recently, was running as the Democratic nominee. And he was the one who was elected in November. But this is before then. Gerald Ford is still president, and he's in New York City. And he's there to celebrate the 4th of July as the president of everyone. And as he does, one of the most majestic pictures in the world can come through. The tall ships entering New York Harbor. The concept of tall ships and their use in such matters as this originated in the presidency of John F. Kennedy in the early 1960s. President Kennedy did not live long enough to see the fruition of this, which only began to come in 1964. But that was 49 years ago. Next year, 2026, the United States will have its 250th birthday. And I imagine that if you read about it, what is to come, a lot of planning is already underway for that. And the planning is going to involve lots of tall ships. Whether it also involves bipartisanship, as we saw in 1976, and indeed in 1826, with Adams and Jefferson, who knows where we'll be. But it's something to reflect on. And so as you go to your cookouts, the swimming pools, concerts, watching the fireworks, take a moment and reflect and think back on prior days of July the 4th. And ask yourself this one question. What could I do this weekend? What could I do this weekend to make my life better as a person in this country? There's also an article out today in CNN.com that's not as happy as the one I'm getting ready to read to you from the Washington Post. And it talks about the illness of loneliness, and that the Surgeon General of the United States has said that loneliness is just as deadly and just as the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day or vast obesity. It's a death sentence. We will live shorter amounts of time if we're extremely lonely. And the writer puts it this way: if you are in a situation where you do a lot of takeout food and you bring the food home and you eat by yourself, and then you put it away and then go turn on the television and you binge watch, as many of us do, shows on television, that's okay, provided that you do not do this every single night of the week. For if you do, that is a sure sign of extreme loneliness. So my suggestion or thought, for whatever it is worth, go out and be among people. If you can't meet a new friend this weekend, go see some old ones. Go to a cookout. Get involved. It doesn't cost any money to go see the fireworks. Do something. That would be a good July 4th birthday gift to yourself. Now, this article that I want to read to you is written by a man named Emil Stern. He is from Australia originally. He is now a screenwriter in the city of Los Angeles, California. And with proper recognition of the Washington Post, which printed it, and Mr. Stern, who wrote it, I want to read to you what I hope will be an enjoyable few minutes of listening to what he had to say about becoming a naturalized United States citizen. As an Australian by birth, I have celebrated the 4th of July in a few ways as a student on the Lower East Side of New York, watching fireworks, drinking beer before I knew even what hangovers were. In Los Angeles, now as a permanent resident with my girlfriend, who is now my wife, and other friends, and strictly one cocktail, I had learned my lesson. Last year, 2024, was the first time I celebrated the holiday as an American. Patriotism feels like a fraught subject right now, but I have to tell you what it means to me to be a U.S. citizen. My wife gave birth to our first child, a daughter, in the early hours of June the 22nd last summer. My citizenship interview was scheduled for the morning of June 28th. I had barely left the house since we returned from the hospital. I spent my spare waking moments going over the little naturalization manual that the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services had given to me. I had finished my biometrics appointment and I was ready to go. The booklet featured 100 simple questions about civics and U.S. history. But in my deep deprived state, I wasn't sure how much I would retain or even recall when the moment came. I packed my bag with the necessary papers the night before the appointment, though day and night with a newborn in the house were vague categories. After a few broken intervals of sleep and diaper changing, it was 9 a.m. and time to go. I wore a white shirt, jacket, nice pants. At some point in the preparation, I showered, something I might or might have not have managed in my prior days. I had my little booklet tucked into my pocket in case I could manage any last minute cramming through the ride downtown. It was a bright, dazzling Friday morning, and outside the federal buildings, anxious and excited families lined up in their professional best. I joined them. I was thinking about my daughter, my first separation for her. I had a pot of coffee in me. I clutched my interview notification letter as I made it through the necessary security. The mood inside the building was a happy one. Groups were taking photos, going the wrong way, turning back to look for the elevators. Older folks were guided by their younger families. It made sense that the mood was full of cheer and anticipation. Everyone here was approaching an inflection point in their lives, including myself. My green card felt unconditional enough, but it still required renewals every 10 years. I hoped it would go well today. I was also prepared to blank and not know the answer to every question, given my lack of sleep. My mother's anniversary of her death would fall in a day or two, and I thought back to birth, death, and the shape of my life to come. Everything was present. At some moments, the emotion would catch me and I would find myself tearing up. I felt like a newborn myself, just living in a jumbled, perpetual present. The Declaration of Independence, I thought, the Bill of Rights, swaddling, an effective way of calming your baby. Jefferson, Hamilton, did I get the breast milk in the fridge? I reported to a counter, had my application letter stamped, and proceeded to a large waiting room. My name was called almost as soon as I sat down, and I followed my interviewer to a small room, and she asked me questions, ones that I was relieved to find I knew the answers to. She asked me whether there were any changes to my application since I had filed it, and I said, yes. I'd had a daughter, handing over the copy of the letter the hospital had given us. When was she born? The 22nd, I replied. She paused and said, the 22nd? That was only 6 days ago. And her eyes even welled up, for she had daughters too. I had pictured a few different ways this interview could go, but I did not anticipate it would be so human, so heartfelt, that I would be questioned not by a stone-faced bureaucrat, but by someone professional, but also kind, power combined with empathy. My daughter's first July 4th, she noted, would arrive in a matter of days, and we both found it moving. The interview fell on the day after the fateful presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and it felt like the whole country was unsettled. But when you meet someone who really believes in America, it can only affirm your own faith. And then the interview was over. She gave me a form that said I'd been approved for same-day naturalization, something I hadn't realized even existed. I had expected further processing, not for everything to happen all at once, and got a bit choked up. It would not just be my daughter's first 4th of July. In a few days, it would be mine, my first as a citizen. Still in a dream, I texted my wife to update her, then reported to another window where I gave up my green card. I'd been so proud of it, protecting it in my travel pack, but now it was no longer relevant. The last group was finishing up. Some Italians were taking photos of one another in front of the flag. I waited for a quorum of enough newly minted citizens for the next swearing-in ceremony. An American woman fussed with her teenage son's hair before he had his picture taken for his naturalization. Happy to have reached this moment, we allowed her to do that. Here there was no cynicism about the American dream or the American idea. No matter what steps my fellow new citizens had taken to reach this point, they would not have been taken lightly, and they were not easy. Others gathered, about a dozen of us. Most of them, from the looks of things, had been told with more notice than I had received that this moment was coming, because they were dressed for the occasion, with American flags in their lapels, and jackets that had red, white, and blue accents, and I was proud to join them. I read over the cards that had been left on my seat as a welcome pack, with the words to the Star-Spangled Banner and the Oath of Allegiance. Soon the man who came to swear us in appeared. He was Asian American, wearing a jacket, and told us he'd been through this process as well. He read the roll call of names and the countries. There were new Americans here from France, Chile, Iran, China. He read the oath. We affirmed it, and that was it. That was it. I was an American. I lined up with the others to get a photo with my little American flag against a black backdrop of a larger stars and stripes. No longer mentally reviewing history facts of this country, I had a new inner monologue. I was a new father. I had a new family in the country of which I was now a citizen. We would do something for the 4th of July, even if it didn't involve leaving the house. We could make burgers at home. I could make an apple pie. We would celebrate. When I got back, I hoped my wife would be able to get some sleep, but I knew our daughter was probably wide awake. Outside the federal building, I saw the man who had done the swearing in taking a cigarette break. I nodded and waved, and he smiled back at me. I had nowhere to go but home. That's it. He writes about becoming an American citizen and ends it with the best line of all. He had nowhere to go but home. I hope you've enjoyed that article and my thoughts about the 4th of July. I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope to see you again in a few days, a week from Monday. Thanks.